than hematopoiesis, not about making new cells. Hemostasis is about maintaining homeostasis with the level of blood. So it's referring to, hemostasis refers to stopping of bleeding. There are a number of different steps in the process or actions that limit and prevent blood loss, including the blood vessel vascular spasm, platelet plug formation, and blood coagulation. They are most effective in small blood vessels injuries, and you may think you never need to use them, but honestly, just moving our joints and things can lead to micro breaks, and blood clotting hemostasis is an important part of that. So the vascular spasm, that's stimulated by cutting or breaking a small blood vessel. The smooth muscle in it would contract rapidly. That slows blood loss very quickly, and the ends of the vessel may close back up completely due to that. It's triggered by the stimulation of the blood vessel wall and pain receptor reflexes. The response doesn't last for a very long time. It lasts a few minutes, but its effect can last up to 30 minutes. That allows time for the platelet plug to form, and then covered by coagulation of the blood. Serotonin is released from platelets, and that helps with vasoconstriction, and that further helps to limit blood loss. That platelet plug formation is triggered by exposure of platelets to collagen. Collagen is generally on the outside of blood vessels. Platelets are on the inside of blood vessels. So platelets shouldn't come into contact with collagen unless there's a break in the blood vessel. So when that break occurs, blood starts escaping, platelets adhere to one another, the end of the broken vessel, exposed collagen, and that forms a plug that helps control blood loss. And then the most effective mechanism, which takes 5 to 15 minutes to fully get engaged, is blood coagulation, which is the formation of a blood clot. It happens in a series of reactions in which one step activates the next step. This is a classic cascade reaction, and we went through in a little bit more detail on Monday. It's initiated by two different possible starting factors, the extrinsic or intrinsic clotting mechanisms. As I said, most breaks in the vessel are going to activate some of both of these pathways, but they are two distinct pathways. Many chemicals are used in coagulation, and they are all called clotting factors. Vitamin K is necessary for some of those clotting factors, so vitamin K becomes an important regulator of blood coagulation. At any given moment, coagulation will depend on the balance between procoagulants that favor coagulation and anticoagulants which inhibit coagulation. The major event is the conversion of soluble fibrinogen into insoluble fibrin, which traps the blood. So our mechanisms are vascular spasm, platelet plug formation, and then blood coagulation. The extrinsic clotting mechanism is triggered by blood coming into contact with the tissues which are outside the blood vessels, which is why this is called the extrinsic pathway. The damaged tissues will release something called tissue thromboplastin, also called factor 3. That's not found in blood. That begins the cascade, which involves the activation of several clotting factors, leading to thrombin converting fibrinogen into insoluble fibrin threads, and those fibrin threads stick to the damaged blood vessels and trap the blood in the platelets, what we call a blood clot. Reminder, this is a positive feedback mechanism. Once this begins, that cascade is going to drive it to completion. One of the few positive feedback mechanisms we deal with this year. In the intrinsic clotting mechanism, the clot starts without tissue damage. It becomes activated when the blood comes in contact with a foreign surface. That could be collagen in the connective tissues instead of the endothelium of the blood vessels. It can also happen on just glass tubes. It's triggered by a factor called Hagerman factor 12, which is found inside the blood, and it's as with the extrinsic clotting mechanism that begins the sequential activation, the cascade of clotting factors, and results in the same mechanism, thrombin converting fibrin to fibrinogen and getting our blood clot. So extrinsic, damage to the vessel or tissue. Intrinsic, blood contacts a foreign surface. Prothrombin activator is the key player in both extrinsic and intrinsic mechanisms. Prothrombin activator converts prothrombin to thrombin. Thrombin is an enzyme that takes fibrinogen and converts it to fibrin. And here is the entire pathway. These both extrinsic and intrinsic meet at factor 10, which is prothrombin activating factor, giving us our clot. And I won't walk through all of these. In fact, you see down here some of them are overlapped, but I do recommend that you go through table 14.9, find out each of these components, where they are synthesized, and which mechanism they are important in. But again, I want to stress that we don't just have an extrinsic or an intrinsic. In most clots, both of those will be involved. After that clot forms, it retracts, and that pulls the edges of the broken vessel together and helps squeeze serum from the clot. That serum is plasma that doesn't have fibrinogen anymore. There is platelet-derived growth factor will be released from the platelets, and that stimulates smooth muscle cells and fibroblasts to begin the repair of the blood vessel wall. Plasmin comes in and digests fibrin threads, and that helps to dissolve the clot. You may hear these clinically. A thrombus would be a blood clot that forms abnormally in a vessel, whereas an embolus is a blood clot that's moving through a vessel. So a thrombus is a blood clot in a vessel that's supplying a vital organ, such as the brain or heart. Infarction means you block the delivery of oxygen to a tissue. So in the case of a myocardial infarction, it would be the blocking of oxygen delivery to heart tissue. An embolism is a clot that travels and then may become a blockage in a vessel or an organ. So if it's the lungs, pulmonary embolism. Arterial sclerosis is the accumulation of fat in arterial linings, and that can contribute to abnormal clot formation, forming thrombi or emboli. Deep vein thrombosis is a clot formation due to the pooling of stagnant blood, usually in the femoral or popliteal veins, deep veins of the pelvis. There are some serious complications of DVT, including pulmonary embolism. It occurs with prolonged periods of immobility, in some cases long airplane flights when you're not moving. Some of the symptoms of DVT would include deep muscle pain, cramps, redness, swelling, dilation of the surface veins, which is called phlebitis, and that clot may break off hours or days after it has formed. To prevent coagulation, we have the smooth lining of the blood vessels discourages the accumulation of platelets and clotting factors. That's why arterial sclerosis can encourage coagulation in some cases. As a clot forms, the fibrin absorbs the thrombin, and that prevents the clot from the reaction from spreading further. There are antithrombin proteins that inactivate additional thrombin by binding to it and blocking its action on fibrinogen. And there are some cells, such as basophils and mast cells, that secrete heparin. And you recall that heparin is an anticoagulant. So some of those things that inhibit blood clot formation, again, that smooth endothelial lining of blood vessels is very important. Prostacyclin is going to inhibit the adherence of platelet to blood vessel walls. Fibrin threads absorb thrombin. Antithrombin in the plasma interferes with how thrombin works, and heparin. is an anticoagulant. And that takes us to the end of section 4.